Castlevania Bloodlines was released on the Sega Genesis back in 1994. The title is interesting as it was the only Castlevania game ever released on a Sega console and has never been ported over to any other system since its release. As of this writing, this is the only Castlevania game I've ever played, and the series never crossed my radar as a child. So what better place to start than with my beloved Sega Genesis? Castlevania Bloodlines takes place in 1917. Elizabeth Bartlett has triggered the events leading up to World War I in her attempt to resurrect Dracula. We can then take control of either John Morris or Eric Lecard. John Morris uses the famous vampire killer whip, while Eric uses the Alucard spear. The characters feel similar, but there are some key differences making playing through the game with both a different experience. John can whip left or right while stationary, but can also whip diagonally while in the air, giving a slightly better reach. Eric can spear straight up, as well as diagonally while stationary, but is more limited while jumping. John's whip can also be used as a grappling hook of sorts, allowing him to get across large gaps, while Eric has a super jump, allowing him to access areas not possible by John. The level design occasionally takes into account each character's abilities, resulting in slightly different paths through a couple of the levels. Castlevania Bloodlines is a game I've spent many hours on over the past few years. The controls initially felt very stiff, as there is almost no momentum at all. Jumps are on a specific arc regardless of speed or how long you've pressed the jump button. While it feels limiting at first, the levels are built around the specific jumping mechanic, and it's really a non-issue. Same goes for the enemy placement. If you take your time and understand the limitations of your movement and the excellent range of your weapon, there really isn't anything wrong with the controls. The jumping, walking, and attacks are all predictable and responsive. In addition to the whip or spear, you can collect jewels which power up secondary weapons. These include the holy water, a battle axe, and a boomerang. Generally speaking, these will assist in inflicting damage from a safe distance. Each of these weapons has a secondary attack by pressing up. It will cost more jewels to use the secondary attack, but it will inflict more damage. I never found myself actually utilizing these, however, more often triggering them by accident while jumping. Finally, you can collect a coat of arms offering an upgrade to the whip and spear. Collecting 3 will offer a significant upgrade. The spear will appear on fire, and the whip will have a noticeable glow as well. The entire item system is a lot deeper than I thought going in, and I rather enjoyed experimenting with the different weapons and their secondary attacks. Castlevania Bloodlines features just 6 levels spanning across the European continent. The opening stage follows the traditional Castlevania formula, starting outside Dracula's castle in Romania and then traversing through it. It's a great opening level, and in my case, a great introduction to the Castlevania series. However, Dracula is nowhere to be found, and our heroes then move on to the next country. Each level is actually rather massive and broken into many different sections. These sections can vary greatly, both in style and gameplay mechanics. The scale and variety is probably what I enjoy most about Castlevania Bloodlines. The varying style of each section of each level keeps things from ever feeling even remotely stale, and gives a wonderful sense of adventure one looks for when playing a video game. The graphics are more of a mixed bag. Some of the levels feature a lot of detail and a great use of color. Other levels are a bit more stagnant without much detail at all. Still, the developers did throw in a lot of graphical wizardry, making this title stand out on the Sega Genesis. There are water effects everywhere, giving the illusion half the stage is underwater. It wouldn't be a Bloodlines review if I didn't mention traveling up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, where the tower appears to lean back and forth as you make your way up its interior. The reflections in Section 2-1 are cool as well, where the entire stage is reflected in the moving water. As a whole, Castlevania Bloodlines is a beautiful game that has aged exceptionally well through the past 2 decades. And finally, there is the soundtrack. Like the level design and the graphics, it is quite varied and usually exceptional. The tracks are lengthy, the compositions have a lot of depth, and the instrument samples are crisp and clear. The Genesis tends to do a great job recreating deep brass and horn sounds. The sound engineers did a great job playing to the strengths of the Genesis hardware. Rounding things out are the boss battles. The bosses are huge and fill up the screen nicely, featuring multiple moving segments. Their patterns seem challenging at first, but it's never too hard to figure out their weak points. Defeating them is a satisfying experience, and they add to the overall experience. This review has been a few years in the making, as I wanted to truly understand everything about Castlevania Bloodlines and deliver a review that lives up to the legacy the game has left behind. Castlevania Bloodlines is not a perfect game. The controls simply aren't as good as other games in this series, and definitely not as good as the best games of the 16-bit generation. There are consistency issues as well, and some sections are flat out bland and boring. Still, as a whole, I fell in love with Castlevania Bloodlines. Even without any nostalgia for the game or the series, the game immediately grabbed my attention and held it for many multi-hour playing sessions. The challenge is great, but I made it a little farther every time, learned the nuances of the items, figured out the weak points of the bosses, and became one with the stiff controls. Castlevania Bloodlines is an exceptionally great game, and easily one of the best games available for the Sega Genesis. 4 out of 5.